a lot of the people that are into climate denial latch onto the, carbon dioxide is good for plants, and, carbon dioxide was over 1,000 parts per million, and, the Mesozoic, and so, there's nothing to worry about, and actually we're doing great things for the planet by throwing a bunch of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And I appreciate that everybody understands that isn't true on this Climate Crisis Club, but it does leave a lot of confusion for just the average person that isn't really tuned into the environment. And so that was the springboard for me writing the article about the ancient carbon dioxide. I articulated it in a way that people that don't have an ecological background or haven't taken plant physiology can better understand why what we're doing in terms of carbon dioxide is, catastrophic. There was an article that came out several weeks ago that we're not in a sixth mass extinction by a University of Arizona researcher. He did some analysis of 500 years of data, and based on the genera that had disappeared, that we weren't in a mass extinction event. And, I felt that needed a pushback. And so I've actually written an article that I'm going to release in the next week explaining why we're not only in a mass extinction event, but we're nearing the end of it. I hate it when people get so tied up into data, they lose all context of what's happening in the world around them. The loss of biodiversity is more than just the loss of species or the loss of genera. It's the loss of numbers. And when you look at the numbers of individuals of wildlife that have disappeared over just the last 50 years, research has confirmed it's at least 70%. And, this was research that came out 5-6 years ago. My guess is it's even more than that. There's research that shows, similarly, that we've lost 3 billion birds during that time, just in North America. And so, we're experiencing a cataclysmic decline in wildlife numbers, but not only in North America, but across the planet. And species numbers, the more numbers there are of a species, the more genetic resilience they have to change. And so when we lose numbers, we also deprive species of their ability to adapt to the changes that we're creating. And so it's another feedback loop that it may not show immediately in terms of a species disappearing, but it will manifest itself in a threshold by which we lose we are losing mountains of species right now, but most of them are just undetected and unknown. But we're going to start losing the ones that we do know, and it's going to be a lot more in your face. And so I've also was a endangered species branch chief with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for about 11 years. And prior to that, for another 10 years, I worked on conservation efforts with the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service for imperiled species. And so, I have a fairly broad background in how the United States implements and manages the Endangered Species Act. And so I've written a long essay about the Endangered Species Act and really why it's been ineffective and how it's kind of a mirror of human nature. And I'm going to be releasing that. One of the things that fed me the most humble pie when I was a professional was working on Carnivore demographics and ecology, because it changes, it changes with the habitat. You can insert one predator into an ecosystem and it completely changes the entire ecosystem. You take one predator out and it changes the entire ecosystem. And the degree and the amount of change differs with the type of habitat you're in. What happens in a mountain range that's surrounded by desert could be completely different than what happens in a mountain range that's continuous with other mountains. And so the other thing about carnivore ecology is, and with some other animals, is their ability to move long distances. And, for example, a mountain lion, I think there's one documented case of a mountain lion yearling, or, a dispersing male that traveled like 400 miles in Montana to set up a new territory. And so, we like to think everything is local, and even fish and game agencies like to characterize it, if they see it, there's too many mountain lions, that they've got a local mountain lion problem, when in actuality, those mountain lions may be coming from 100 miles away. And people just like to have everything as black and white and everything is concrete. But what I've learned in the time I've spent with Canada lynx and fisher and marten and some of the other carnivores is that everything is so complex, it's impossible for any one person to understand. I mean, people just can't appreciate how far many of the carnivores can move. In Canada, badgers are a species of, they have, I think, a red list or something. They did some research on badgers up there and found and documented one badger that moved 70 miles in British Columbia. So, I know of lynx that have moved 400 miles. I know of mountain lions that's moved over 400 miles. I know of wolverines that have moved over 400 miles. I mean, people just can't appreciate how much they move and how imperiled they are by all of the highways and fragmentation that we've done to the landscape. I mean, they need movement corridors, and I don't know if anybody saw the posts I did on the islands and fragmented habitat that we're creating on continental areas, but it's significant to the point that I think I wouldn't be surprised of all, maybe as much as a third of all vertebrates are now suffering from some form of inbreeding depression. And that could be conservative. Providing connectivity across highways or around different areas is a good thing no matter where you are, whether it's urban areas or rural areas or in the backcountry, where highways go through forested and rangelands. So there is no disadvantages. And in fact, you need look no further than wildlife connectivity to understand how little priority wildlife receive. I mean, think about all of the overpasses and underpasses that we've created across North America to allow humans to safely go across and over and under different highways. And compare that with the number of overpasses or underpasses or whatever they may be for wildlife, and it's so insignificant as to be it's not even there, basically. I mean, we celebrate a overpass and meanwhile there's like tens of thousands that we construct without a second thought for humans to safely navigate highways all the time. And so, yeah, more is better. There's no, when we first started building highways, we would have just incorporated that into the entire planning effort for highways and tried to connect habitats as best we can, but there's no money in it. And so, we don't perceive wildlife as worth anything, and we never have. And so it has been ignored, and almost assuredly, other than, an occasional wildlife connectivity overpass or underpass that we celebrate as a huge victory, we're not going to do anything. I mean, species are, there's study after study showing how much that species are being confined into smaller and smaller areas and basically suffering from inbreeding, whether it's large cats or frogs or amphibians or lizards or whatever. When I was still working in Idaho, there was a stretch of freeway that was maybe about 30 miles long that in 1 year I counted 93 dead badgers. And I was trying to work with the highway department to try to figure out some way to mitigate or reduce the amount of mortality on badgers. And it was unsuccessful because what was happening was the highway department along the freeway would plant a plant called crested wheatgrass. And so within the freeway right-of-way, you had this really lush crested wheatgrass, and it's an introduced plant, but outside the right-of-way, you had annual grasses that had invaded, like cheatgrass and Medusa head. And so the crested wheatgrass was actually a magnet for ground squirrels. And so, you had this lots and lots of ground squirrels within the freeway right-of-way, and outside you had nothing. And so badgers were attracted to the ground squirrels from, I mentioned earlier about the one documented in British Columbia of 70 miles, but that's not unique. I mean, badgers move and move and move. And so that highway stretch was drawing badgers from 30, 40, 50 miles away with the prey availability along the freeway. And we couldn't figure out any way to deal with the badger mortality on the freeway. And it's just another case that, we build into our infrastructure killing fields. And, a lot of times it's not intentional, but it is what it is. And I can tell you one other thing that kind of builds on what I said earlier about predators. What I've seen in some areas is that red foxes are much more attuned to being around people in close quarters. I mean, I've seen them within cities that aren't too highly developed. And then on the outskirts of that, I see coyotes, because in most cases, coyotes will kill foxes. And so when coyotes move in, you can almost bet that foxes will move out or they're going to die. And so you've got that kind of dynamic going on within the area that you're talking about, as well as the connectivity issues associated with the roads and houses, and trying to parse out, what's going to help the coyote and what's going to help the fox with that dynamic when they're in close quarters and, new highways and development. Boy, all you can do is provide connectivity and hope for the best and watch and see what happens. The coral reefs, it's another one that's kind of like the ancient carbon dioxide. If you've seen the recent report that came out that coral cover is, is one of the highest that it's ever been. And so the climate deniers, that's another favorite talking point, is the coral cover. But it really is like clear cutting a forest and then celebrating that there's weeds there now. And that's kind of what we're seeing with the Great Barrier Reef and a lot of the reefs around the world. Is what you've got is we're losing the biodiversity of corals, and what fills the gap is one or two species of corals that are much more tolerant of high temperatures, but also are, just don't have the capabilities of maintaining corals over time and are much more susceptible to bleaching and all these other things. And so, I think it was Alex that said earlier that, the corals, we've tipped them over the top. And of course, with that is a huge amount of biodiversity, ocean biodiversity. It can't, once you've lost all the corals, it can't be any worse than that in terms of corals themselves. But obviously it's a huge, what's termed tipping point. Scientists often shoot themselves in the foot in multiple ways. One is they always undersell for fear of, if they overextend themselves, they'll be the subject of criticism from all their colleagues or whoever. And so, but if they undersell what is happening, there's no reputational effect. And so, they're trying to undersell everything. And so we always hear kind of a conservative ploy. The other thing is, this is another case where, the ecology of the corals and what I explained earlier, we're losing the biodiversity, and what's being replaced is, these, submarginal corals. If you were a researcher and you went to your family for a Thanksgiving dinner, you're forced to explain to them about, what your research is about in a way that your family members can understand. But they should be doing that on a regular basis with the general public, with all of their research all of the time, and they don't. And so when people don't understand what's going on, they fill in the gaps with the charlatans that, were rife on the internet and social media. And so, somebody fills the void that the scientists leave behind. I always felt like it was under attack. It's less about science and more about honesty and integrity. And people have a hard time believing that, 20 years before climate change was an issue, I was being attacked. And
what were you being attacked for?
Trying to protect ecosystems, whether they were rangelands or forested areas, cutting old growth. Probably the most destructive environmental president that ever existed was Ronald Reagan. If you look at the amount of they completely undermined any rangeland conservation attempts. He logged more forests than probably any president in history. And the people in the agencies, the ones that remained, he didn't hire anybody for about 8 years, were, under siege and pretty much had to keep their heads down. And Reagan gave rise to Bush and then to Trump. And all they've done is just more of the same. Ronald Reagan once said that trees cause more pollution than automobiles do. That gives you some perspective on just how bad it was. And I was under attack within the agencies. And, I've got some anecdotes in the book that if you're interested, you could read. And they're just a small sample of the kinds of situations that I had to deal with during my career. I was always living on the edge. I mean, my career was in peril a lot of times. And because I was trying to be an advocate for the environment. And the things that I was trying to do then were actually climate change friendly. I mean, people discount regularly that carbon sequestration is a huge factor in the ever worsening climate. We humans, in just a fairly short time, 500 years to 1,000 years, have shredded 45 to 50 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal that the planet did per year just by logging, grazing, and draining wetlands for agriculture and converting natural landscapes into croplands. And so, we talk about we're generating 50 to 60 megatons of carbon dioxide emissions a year, but nobody talks about we've also, on the flip side of that coin, removed the ability of the planet to remove 45 to 50 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year through carbon sequestration. And that is a direct result of ecosystem destruction. There's nothing that would be better for the environment and all of the different threats that we're facing, whether it's infectious diseases, microplastics, climate change, loss of biodiversity. Any of those things would all benefit from us conserving and protecting ecosystems, but those are the things that we sacrifice first to pay for, renewables or all of these quick fix utopian ideas that we have that's going to save the planet.
Yeah.
It may be the most difficult thing for an environmentalist to do, or a human to do, is accept humans for who they are. And it was hard for me too. I mean, my entire life, I always thought, people are going to understand what's going to happen. People will understand the value of rangelands, for example, and how clean water and the amount of water is being compromised by livestock grazing. I mean, I thought that back in the late 70s and early 80s. And then the value of old growth forests that were being cut down, during the Reagan administration, that, people will come to their senses and see that this is, just not sustainable, and that we can't survive that kind of environmental exploitation. And to actually accept people for who they are may be the most difficult thing, not only for me, but for almost all people. And we all want to think that we're going to be something more than what we are. And we also like to think that we were something more than what we are in years past. We love to romanticize who we are, but our dishonesty is almost entirely with ourselves. And I just don't see that ever changing. And there's only a few people that I know of that are capable of, okay, the person in the White House didn't get there, on their own. They were voted in. The people that voted the Bolsonaro and Brazil, and, we've got all of these dictators all over the world. They got there somehow, and it was because they had a lot of support. Maybe not as much as they should have had, but that's who we are. And just seeing people in everyday lives and accepting people for who they are is just a very, very difficult thing. I mean, there's all kinds of sincere, well-intentioned people that think they are doing good things for the environment, that think they are sustainable, that are just deceiving themselves. And I was no different. I mean, I said it in my book. There was a time that I thought that if everyone lived a lifestyle like mine, that we would be sustainable. But it's not true. And the more I learned and the older I got and the more I recognized my own ecological footprint on the planet, the more I finally was able to look in the mirror and actually say, I am part of the problem. And humans, for all of existence, have been part of the problem, is who we are.